Has the COVID-19 pandemic affected domestic abuse in Barbados? We'll keep watching this video to find out. Hey guys, thanks for joining me again on Barbados Matters, where we check out the sites and discuss the issues. Towards the back of me is Bathsheba, on the east coast of Barbados. I don't know what it is that I love about this side of the island. I think it's probably because of the rougher terrains and the rougher seas. There's also the soup bowl, which is great for surfing, and some wonderful beach houses. So today we're going to be discussing domestic abuse, what that really is, and whether the COVID-19 pandemic has led to an increase in incidents of domestic abuse in Barbados. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.
So I'm welcoming Barbara Goddard today, who's the chairman of the Advocates Against Domestic Abuse. Just tell us a little bit about what domestic abuse is.
Well, domestic abuse is any form of abuse that is physically, mental, emotionally, financial, sexually, but is actually consistent. You're being called a fool, you're being called stupid, you're being called various nasty words. And that is a persistent behavior. And then after that, you get a lull. And then it starts again. That is really what we regard as domestic abuse, because what you get is a honeymoon period, the abuse, the honeymoon period, and the abuse. Yes.
Okay, so what you're saying basically is a pattern yes. of abusive behaviors.
It is.
And there's a cycle.
There is definitely.
It's generally a cycle.
And generally a cycle. Verbal abuse or emotional abuse is more often than actual physical abuse, because we think of domestic abuse or violence as very much a physical act, and most women will tell you what they find damaging is the emotional, verbal, and mental aspect, because it's so long lasting. So when that woman or man for that matter leaves that relationship, you still have years of where the emotional fallout has to be dealt with. So the arm might have been healed long time ago, but now the emotional fallout. So for some people, you're talking about months, you're talking about years. So there is no set time frame for when a person is going to be free of what they have experienced.
I think that's the crux of it. I think sometimes people, as you said, believe that, domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, whatever, domestic violence, whatever we want to call it, that it's just physical. And sometimes when you talk with persons, and I'm glad you said that this happens to not just females. I think it's important to recognize that, it does happen to men as well. But as you said, it's not just the physical, it's not just the punching and the kicking and the slapping, it's also the name calling, the constant accusations and things like that. And it wears away at the person's self-esteem.
And unfortunately for a number of women, they move from one abusive relationship into another. So there's no healing, because the person themselves have not gone through a process of healing. And we have to remember that for women, how a lot of them end up in abusive relationship is because they come from dysfunctional environments, i.e. they might have been raped at an early age, they might have been molested in some form, they might have got lots of verbal abuse. All of that can have set up long time ago, and they just continue that into adulthood. So until that woman actually gets some form of treatment and then recognize that her past is actually guiding her present, and till that is actually acknowledged, she is unable to make that change. For some people, a level of awareness ensues that makes them thinking, hold on a minute, I've got to do something about my life. But a lot of people do not develop that level of awareness. And that's really where organizations like us come in, that what we do is try to help women to recognize that level of awareness so that they can make a change. And remember, no matter whether it's male or female, abuser, perpetrator, the individual have to make the change. The individual have to want to make the change.
So what do you say, when you hear people say, well, she obviously likes the abuse because she stays in the relationship. Why do persons stay in abusive relationships?
They can, because it's something that they recognize. If you've come from an abusive home, that's your normal. So therefore, being in an abusive relationship is normal to you because you don't know any difference. So you don't recognize a healthy relationship because you're not used to a healthy relationship. There's that aspect of it. Then there's the other person who comes from, quote unquote, what we will term a normal home, and they got caught up with a person that they fell in love with. And when the abuse started, they didn't even recognize the abuse. So by the time they get to the point of recognizing abuse, they're actually drawn into it. By that time, they may be psychologically so damaged. Their self-esteem may be at rock bottom. And it's really important to recognize that a person who has low self-esteem doesn't necessarily mean that they could not have a highly professional career. But there are many, many women who are well placed in well professional jobs, who are very capable and running their jobs extremely well. But once they leave that and go home, they are a complete wreck. And that is what one of the things about abuse. Domestic violence is different from any other form of violence. And I think that's really important that people understand that. And a perpetrator or an abuser, however it is you want to describe that person, when they are abusing, they are in an intimate relationship. But when that person go out, they are nice as pie. That person will only conduct the abuse towards the intimate partner. But all the rest of life and society, they are nice as pie, very good. And that makes it very challenging when someone turns around and say, but they're such nice people. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it's really important that we actually understand the role that the abuser play within an intimate partner relationship as separate from the role of somebody who is violent outside and don't really care whether it's their mother, father, son, or Holy Ghost that they're being violent to. And that's a whole different thing altogether. And I should clarify that by saying that there are some abusers who are not only abusive with their intimate partner, but they have another violent streak, sociopathic, psychological streak that is delivered outside of that. So you got another different stream of an abuser. So the narcissistic person in a relationship will be narcissistic outside of the relationship.
Yeah. So basically within a relationship, it's fair to say that an abuser, they're trying to exert power and control at that time over their partner.
Very much so. It's right. Very much about power and control. It's very much, and we don't give perpetrators excuses. But when you delve into a perpetrator, when you do get to a point where, and we do work with perpetrators when they do contact us, and you get to a point of working with a perpetrator, you will find that there are lots of things in their background that are propelling them also. But when you are going to deal with a perpetrator, you still have to take into account where that perpetrator comes from, because you're not born to be an abuser. So how did that person develop those characteristics? So there have to be something between their young life that formulated them into this type of person. I find that, and I can only speak from myself as a counselor, that a lot of the perpetrators that I have dealt with over years, a lot of them do not like their mothers. That's one thing I have recognized with a lot of perpetrators that I have dealt with. Once you get into the counseling and therapy aspects of it and working with them, you realize that, yes, they're far from love their mothers.
I think you've touched on a couple of points there, because I think as mothers, and I think, some people will not want to accept this, but often children, and in this instance, we're talking predominantly males as abusers, yes, that they would have experienced violence firsthand within the home at the hands of a mother. You know, it may be just a slap. They may believe that's disciplining, etc., etc. I mean, in my work in itself, you know, often, you know, the frustrations of mothers, and they take it out on their children, and they're slapping and hitting their children. And so they learn violence within the home.
Yes.
And I would have worked with perpetrators as well. And one of the things that I find is that often they're not, they would not have had male role models. They've not had fathers that they learn how to be men. So when we ask them, where did you learn to be a man? They've learned it from maybe a big brother, maybe somebody on the block and whatever. And some of the behaviors that they would have witnessed external to the home is now what they're bringing in, you know, into their relationships as well. And the other thing I think for me was that the notion of what a man is, you know, it's to be this rough and tough and aggressive. Another thing I find, you know, they feel that their role as a man is to be a breadwinner. When you're in a situation now where the man has become unemployed or the woman is earning more money than him, you know, then that brings other issues into the relationship. So as you said, you're not excusing their behaviors, but when you look at men, you can see sometimes where some of these patterns of behaviors have developed.
Well, indeed, and you have to look at where the patterns of behavior develop, because there's no way from a counseling perspective, if you don't look at that you're going to be able to help move that person forward. So you really did, because in many instances, they are not even aware that their past is actually controlling a lot of what they are doing.
Absolutely.
And so therefore, this whole thing of not taking responsibility for your actions is very much part of what a perpetrator has in their mind, which is, well, it is your fault that I am this way.
Absolutely.
You know, so a lot of what you do is getting them to accept responsibility for their actions. I mean, and that's the same thing also applies to victims. Sometimes we have to even get victims to understand their own awareness, their own responsibility, and that responsibility, some of the decisions that they make. At what point did you recognize or become aware of that person's behavior? That's where when we talk about awareness. So the awareness of what is domestic abuse, so that someone can at the very onset think, hold on a minute, this has something that can lead to something pretty powerful in a negative way. So I need to take a step back. And an example of that is someone who said to me after the person that, you know, she ended up marrying, and within the first few months of before they got to the marriage state, you know, and are living together, is that she witnessed him abusing his ex, and in a really physical way. And you know, when you say, well, what did you think of that? You know, the response is, well, I thought he had good qualities. So, you know, it's like, where was your mindset? Yeah. So, you know, so even as women, we ourselves are caught up in certain patterns of behavior that we need to let go of. So perpetrators can change, but a perpetrator only changes when that perpetrator wants to change. And therefore, you can have a perpetrator who will go and counseling because they may be mandated to have counseling, but that doesn't mean that the perpetrator has changed, because anyone who's narcissistic and sociopathic has a way of appearing as if they have absorbed and make the changes, because they're good manipulators, they're good masters of pretense. So the difference is when someone truly wants to change. And I have had men who have said, well, I don't know that I'm an abuser. I don't think that I'm an abuser, but my ex has said so. Does that make me abuser? So, you know, so therefore that person is actually questioning what has been said to them. And that's really will mean a huge difference, because by the time you sit with that person and discuss what has been going on in their life or how they see things and why they think they do things, you know, it makes it really wonderful, because that person is on the way to stopping whatever action they were indulging in. And unfortunately, I will say that we do not get access enough to perpetrators, because the thing about it, a perpetrator might go to court, they may be fined or get a protection order against them. That woman hopefully has escaped and get on with her life, but he or she has found another victim.
Yeah.
And the whole thing just continues and continues. Yeah.
I want to say, because you touch on that point in terms of perpetrators. So in my work with perpetrators sent from the court,
Yes.
when you start working with them, yes, at times they're blaming the women, but they're recognizing themselves in the end that there are techniques that they themselves need to embrace and to use.
Yes.
Dealing with conflict situations. Everybody has conflict. We have conflict,
Yes.
generally on a daily basis, but it's how we deal with that.
Yes.
What is what is heartwarming when you're working with these, and these are male perpetrators, I must say, when you're working with them, is that generally after about 2-3 sessions, they're embracing the information that they're being given. It's psychoeducational, but they're embracing the techniques, they're embracing being able to talk to other men in terms of what their experiences are. And I think that's one of the problems that we have here in Barbados, is that, men do not talk, men do not share their experiences. And in our sessions, at the end of it, when you see other men being able to comfort and guide and advise other men, in terms of, well, big man, you could have dealt with that situation differently, and you see the progression, that is really heartwarming. And some of the things that we're talking about, the men will say, well, these are tools that we should have been taught in school. Children need to be taught about domestic abuse. This is not something that should be just thrown on people as adults. They should be learning about what domestic abuse is about from early stages, what are the signs, and how to avoid certain situations. And my last point in this, at that point, is to say, when we buy a car or a house, we research.
Yes.
Ask about various things. When you go into relationships, we do no research. And so one of the things we say is that, you need to sit down with potential partners and just talk to them about their family, talk to them about their upbringing. When you talk to persons, you find out how it is and why they are who they are, why they react to certain things, because we all have histories, we all have pasts, we're all brought up differently. And I think that's a key, is that, when we go into relationships, is that persons don't necessarily take the time to find out who that other partner is. And it goes back to what you're saying, you've witnessed, your partner abusing his child mother, but that's okay because it's her.
Yes.
So that same abusive behavior can then turn on you.
The whole issue of healthy relationships and surrounding and the communication aspect of it and the development of it has not been taught. A lot of people talk about, let's teach children about sex. And I think the thing about sex being a physical act is the easiest part. But I think the most complex part of anything is teaching people about healthy relationships and what all of that encompass, and the emotional aspects of being in a relationship.
So I know internationally they were saying 1 in 3 women are abused, and I think it's 1 in 5 men. What would you say is the prevalence of domestic abuse in Barbados?
I think it's really difficult to say. We can say that domestic abuse is high in Barbados because we actually have no stats. I mean, what the police has is stats in relation to who comes in and log a complaint. So they have their figures. I, as an organization, have figures about who rings me. Another organization might have figures about who rings them, etc. But we haven't had a true survey in Barbados done on domestic abuse since 2007, based around my interaction and the other organizations that I have interacted with. I will say, yes, our domestic abuse situation is bad, because one of the things that Barbados lack is that we actually haven't got a national strategy for domestic abuse. And we really need that in place. And I say that because one of the things that does is that it brings home to every aspect of government how domestic violence impacts. You have a woman who is abused with children. It's going to affect the health ministry. It's going to affect education. It's going to affect productivity. It's going to affect, home affairs. Everything, every single area of life, it's going to impact upon. And I think that till that is actually recognized on the island, we will not move forward.
And I think it is so important because, if you're looking at just reported cases, that is just a minuscule amount in terms of how much abuse is going on
Indeed.
behind closed doors. Because as we know,
Indeed.
people are suffering in silence, males and females. So I think these statistics are definitely needed to understand what the real prevalence, and then for the support systems, obviously, then to be, put in place. So we had COVID last year strike. We went into a lockdown. What can you say in terms of COVID-19 and its impact on domestic abuse?
In March 2020, when we were told that we were going to be locked down, and I remember saying, our phone is going to be ringing off the hook. And it didn't happen to us as an organization. Our 24-hour hotline did ring. I remember distinctly 3 cases that were quite serious, but I didn't get the influx of people that I had expected. But what I did get an influx of people that we already are dealing with, which is quite a large number, and their needs become greater. You went from, and that's as the lockdown progressed, not initially at the onset. You get from the job losses and what that meant in terms of food and in terms of paying rent, etc. So their needs then become greater. So and that has continued. So even to now, today, 2021, our client needs has actually increased, because although we opened up the island in, is it June or July? Forgot now. A lot of people did not get back into work because there were still no jobs, especially those who are working in the hotel or anything surrounding the hotel industry or tourism. So they still didn't get any jobs. So their needs just progress. And, and this year, it hasn't got any better. It hasn't got any better because, I have a number of women who I call homeless at home. They actually have nowhere to live, so they stay at different friends or families or rent a room for a week, and then they can't afford to rent the room for the following week. So I have a number of women are in that situation. So our homeless situation has actually increased. That's one thing I can say. Out of our clientele who we are constantly engaging with, who come from the domestic abuse arena.
So basically you're saying that you didn't necessarily see an increase, but those that you were working for had increased needs during that time.
Very much so. And the other fallout of that is the emotional fallout, because COVID has added the more emotional, mental fallout now. So that has now compounded people who were already stressed. That has now added to their stress levels. So COVID has not made the situation, because situation was always there. Because in 2019, I can tell you easily in 2019 that we were facing a number of issues. What COVID then has done now is compounded those issues. So it's not like all of a sudden COVID has come and now we have these issues. They were already there. It just compounded it.
Right. So your fear would be then that you've got a lot of victims that are still in relationships that have increased stressors, increased triggers for violence.
Well, indeed, because when you look at it, if and remember that all women who are in domestic abuse situations don't necessarily always want to leave, because they're always factors. When we look at how the whole system is impacting upon women in domestic abuse, it's not only that you say someone has been physically abused or but there's all the other factors that you're dealing with. And if that woman wants to leave, it's like, where do I go? There isn't any way to go. Because although we have a safe house, we have to remember that the safe house is very specific. Has a very structure, and it cannot meet everybody's needs anyway. So, and a lot of women is not looking for a safe house. They're not looking to hide. They're actually quite free to and comfortable about leaving that relationship. It's just that they don't have anywhere to go. So of course you stay in that. You stay in that now, and what? I'm out of work. Your partner also might become now out of work because of this situation. There's very little coming in. So you ring organizations like us, we might supply you with a hamper of food, etc. So the stresses, the emotional fallout, the mental fallout is there, and that is slowly increasing. For us as an organization, our biggest concern is if we get back into a more level of normalcy by year end, the mental fallout is going to be so great. And my concern is that we haven't actually got enough in place to manage that. But I don't think we have a mental helpline. I don't think we have. If there is, I am not aware of it. We need a 24-hour hotline for that. We need to be sure that a lot of these women and men, because our suicides have increased, we need to know that they are going to have easy access to someone who can help them through this process. So I think that we really need to get a handle on it, and I think domestic abuse in Barbados need to be placed up higher. It needs to be given that much more attention rather than the attention of when something happens. And also organizations like us who are floundering because we have no money. Organizations like us who are trying our best to hold things together. And that's really what we do. We try our best to hold things together. I mean, as an organization, I'm well aware that there's so much more that needs to be done.
Absolutely.
We need to be doing a lot more, but we haven't got the finance to do it.
So I think, the funding for organizations like yourselves and then also at the other end, that when perpetrators do come to court, that I think every single perpetrator of domestic abuse, should be given the opportunity to receive some kind of psychoeducational,
it should,
group sessions, counsel. That should be something which is done as a matter of course. So even if that relationship ends, as you know, they're going into other relationships, and then that cycle just continues.
Indeed, on. And that should happen out even with a court protection order. That should be part of court protection orders. Yes, that is something that, yes, we're very pleased that it's there. But at the same time, yes, there are areas, of course, that it is lacking. But if those perpetrators are not mandated to do something, a year is up. That woman might come with her life, and and the court protection order might make him scared about going towards that woman, and he might obey it. But guarantee he's going to form another relationship.
Absolutely.
And here we go. Yeah. And so I think that is really essential, and that becomes part and parcel of it, whether it's male or female.
And I think it's important because people will say often, well, it's not only the women that are abused, etc., etc. And I think it's important to say at this point that the reason why there is such a focus on abuse against females is because the seriousness of some of the offences that are committed can end up so much more serious or tragic. Often domestic abuse ends in death or serious injury. And I think, when I deal with perpetrators, that's something that we have to run home, is that it's not that we are minimizing abuse which is meted out to men. It's just that abuse meted out to women can often does end in death. And I think, the statistics show significantly that when women are killed, it's usually at the hands of a husband, partner, or ex-partner or an ex-husband. And I think, that's a fact. Yeah.
Of course.
Because violent behavior escalates, doesn't it? I do safe relationships with teenagers, and even at that young age would recognize, hold on a minute, I didn't realize that is classed as abusive behavior. And even with parents, I would have done sessions recently, and going through all the different types of abusive behaviors, you know, females actually even acknowledge, wow, you know, I do a lot of that as well.
Yes.
So it's so important, you know, for them to understand. So we're now in this COVID era. What would your advice be to persons who now realize that they may well be in an abusive relationship here in Barbados?
So there's churches, there's ours, and we have a 24-hour hotline and that you can contact. We're 43 abuse 432 2873, and you can WhatsApp 837 8262, and you can see us on Facebook and send us a message. We have the National Organization of Women that you can contact. You got the Bureau of Gender Affairs. The shelter has a 24-hour hotline that is for, you know, the person who very much know that they really, when they leave, they really need to be in a secure place, a hiding place. So of course, the police, as usual, and the family conflict unit. Yes, which is still the police, but they deal with domestic abuse. And you know, I know a lot of people are at times not aware that they exist.
They're actually trained to deal with domestic,
they are trained to, yes.
abuse.
We still depend upon the police. I'm a firm believer that we should have an independent liaison officer for domestic abuse in every police station. I really think that should be the case, so that when you go in and you put your case to the police, they take your statement, etc., and do all of the police areas. And then an independent liaison person then should be able to then assist you. That person who will be there for you to talk to and guide you through as you go through whatever processes you're going to do till the end. And that also, I think, will help a lot of men who are being abused and scared of walking into a police station. Because if you had an independent person there, had nothing to do with the police, but at least that independent liaison person will deal with me as a person who is being abused, regardless of my gender.
And that's extremely important, because that's one of the things that men do say, is that, you know, the fear of going into a police station, or when they have gone into the police station, how sometimes they've been mocked and ridiculed, you know, that they're not a real man, they're a mock man. I think that is an important, very good suggestion. And you've obviously pointed us in the direction in terms of what we need to do in the area of domestic abuse, so that we understand the prevalence, as well as the support services that are needed, the funding for the support services for the victims as well as the perpetrators. So I want to thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you on behalf of the Advocates Against Domestic Abuse. Thank you for inviting us into your forum.